Let's now talk about the limitations of critical discourse studies in some applied context or workplaces. One of the commonly cited criticism on critical discourse studies in workplaces has been that they always work on an underlying belief that power is the central thing, and power relies heavily on the elite sections of the society. Similarly, elite part of a working organization. For example, if you look at some of the commonly published works in CDS about workplaces, you will see there would be loads of work related to medical, legal, media, and corporate setting. But still, as we see, there are so many other contexts which almost remain unexplored. They are equally important as compared to medical or legal discourses or domains of work. They should also be pushed forward and worked upon so that we can have a better view of the societies of which discourse is being investigated. There are so many other worlds of contemporary language expertise beyond the iconic easy targets or easy worlds, for example, call centers, legal or medical discourse. Places or domain where people's professional livelihoods depend in explicit or implicit manners, where they work with the crafting, honing, reshaping, designing, and expression of words. There are so many other professions which rely heavily on the communication or discourse skills of their workers. One might call these people language engineers who work with or work through language to earn their livelihood. And using an old-fashioned word, we might call them wordsmith. Thurlow, in this regard, also believes that little research has been done on some pretty obvious domains of wordsmithry. For example, we have very little research on dialect coaches, copy editors or writers which work in various small sections of media or other parts of organizations, technical writers, public relation officers, and advertising copywriters. While the field does sometimes move into some applied context, it still remains well beyond the many actual workplaces where it could be done. And the heartland of serious studies remains education or topics or areas related to education. Applied approaches to workplace studies in CDS are seldom rooted historically. That's another criticism. They just pick one-time conversation or an interaction or maybe a sequence of interaction in the same situation, and they just try to investigate that. But they are not very deeply rooted in the historical aspects of discourse or of that particular discourse. They tend to focus on the cultural politics of contemporary post-industrial societies and try to interpret data based on these domains of power, hegemony, etc. Many studies on workplace discourse hinges on analysis of isolated examples of everyday institutional professional language use. This is what I said a while ago. They do not look at in a certain sequence of history. Rather, they look for isolated examples of language use in certain particular situations of a discourse making. Language is invariably abstracted and recontextualized as a text to be analyzed by discourse experts or analysts. And in this way, language is removed from workers which are the actual initiators or actual bearers of that discourse, and we hardly reach to those workers through the analysis of that discourse. Cameron has also argued for this reason that there should be some micro-analysis approaches to institutional talk through which we can look deep into the lives of the people who are using or who are producing that discourse. Such microanalytic approaches, if there are any already existing, they flaw in so many ways. For example, they do not account properly for the ways workplace discourse is structured by normative systems of regulation and surveillance. How the people structurally are influenced to produce a certain kind of discourse. And simultaneously, there is another issue, how much agency or freedom people have to have their own say when they're working in a structural organization. Having said this, she also goes on to acknowledge and then to conclude that clearly workers are not just cultural dupes who mechanically follow the rules handed down to them. They must have certain agency that should also be investigated when we want to investigate a text in applied context. This gives rise to an important question: what are the priorities or concerns of the workers when it comes to working with the language? What kind of choices do they have, and what kind of impetus do they generate on your own, getting beyond the institutional boundaries or institutional normative regulations? This discussion shows that there are still some points which have not been focused in CDS. Obviously, from this discussion, we can draw that there would be certain areas of applied context which has not been considered. And there are certain ways, for example, looking into the history of such discourses and looking into the concerns of the workers who actually produce such a discourse, which have not been discussed in critical discourse studies of applied context. And this might be a possibility or a rich area to be explored in future studies.